Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. The theme of Shanghai's lockdown this week may well be tightening restrictions for large parts of the city, even as official numbers continue to decline. Indeed, Shanghai's officially recognized daily cases are expected to drop below 1,000 within the next few days for the first time. However, with marching orders from the Standing Committee meeting last week, local authorities have full political cover to push measures to the extreme. On Tuesday, service was suspended on the last 2 subway lines that were still operating in Shanghai, the first time ever that the city's entire system has been shut down. More notices in several Shanghai districts have been issued in recent days, ordering residents to stay home and barring them from receiving non-essential deliveries as part of a so-called quiet period, which we discussed in yesterday's video. There are even reports of some entire buildings or compounds being sent to quarantine facilities due to the discovery of just a single case. Indeed, these reports caused such a public outcry among Shanghai residents that state media responded to the concern, with state-run Global Times writing yesterday, quote, "Shanghai authorities responded to public speculation that one positive infection in a building will result in all residents of the whole building being quarantined. Whether a person is identified as first or second degree close contact is a holistic judgment made by epidemiological professionals according to national standards." End quote. Meanwhile, in Beijing, millions of residents remain in a state of de facto lockdown, though the intensity is not as strict as Shanghai at this point. Official cases in Beijing remain in the dozens each day, though these are mostly people in the closed-off management loops. And of course, there remain dozens of other smaller cities across the country with varying levels of lockdown policies in place too. Page 1 of party mouthpiece The People's Daily published a commentary yesterday, Tuesday, called, quote, "Perseverance for the people, persistence is victory," end quote, exclaiming, quote, "We will surely build a strong line of defense to protect people's lives and health, and we will surely win the tough battle of epidemic prevention and control as soon as possible." End quote. And with impeccable timing, Shanghai's Fudan University has also just published a report projecting that millions will die if the zero cases policy is prematurely relaxed. This is being widely covered in state media across the country. The models produced by the researchers estimate that an unchecked surge of Omicron COVID cases could result in 112 million symptomatic infections, 2.7 million intensive care admissions, and almost 1.6 million deaths between May and July alone. Some of the researchers, however, which include international experts, have expressed that even though zero COVID is preventing these deaths, China needs to move away from its zero COVID policy by vaccinating more elderly people. One American infectious disease modeler at Indiana University's School of Public Health stressed that China needed to use Western-made vaccines rather than the far less effective domestic shots. As we've discussed before, only 61.5% of over 60s in China have received 3 doses of the vaccine, and these are overwhelmingly domestic-produced vaccines, which, like we've discussed, are not particularly effective. Link to the study, which was published in Nature, is in the description below. Also this week, World Health Organization chief Tedros expressed in an interview that China's zero COVID strategy is not sustainable and that, quote, "I think a shift will be very important. Now we know a lot about the virus and we have better tools," end quote. But China's zero COVID policy is here to stay. We learned today that China is planning to set up COVID-19 testing booths within a 15-minute walking distance in every major Chinese city, suggesting that compulsory mass testing will soon be rolled out to hundreds of millions of residents across the country. And lastly, for part 1 on the lockdowns, the economic cost. According to a top economist at Peking University's National School of Development this week, the economic impact of China's latest outbreak and policy response has already caused, quote, more than 10 times that of the initial wave in Wuhan in 2020, end quote. Professor Xu expressed that the disruptions have already affected 160 million people this year and have cost 18 trillion yuan, or 2.68 trillion US dollars. We remember that in 2020, the disruptions from the original lockdown caused China's growth to slow to its lowest point in 30 years, with 2.3% official expansion for the year. With this in mind, Professor Xu expressed doubt that China could reach its growth target of 5.5% this year, even with massive and expensive stimulus. Quote, to put it simply, it is already difficult to reach 2.3% this year, and even harder to go beyond this rate. End quote. As always, guys, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help keep this sort of content sustainable, keep the channel sustainable, the Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and crypto links are in the description below. As always, everyone, thank you so much for your ongoing support. Okay, next up, Taiwan. In an interesting move which analysts are still debating the significance of, the US State Department has removed from its Taiwan page on its website the phrases, quote, the US does not support Taiwan independence, end quote, as well as, quote, acknowledging the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China, end quote. The website has also added a mention of the so-called 6 assurances made during the Reagan administration to protect Taiwan, or to help Taiwan defend itself at least. It appears that the update to the website was made last week, but it was not picked up by Taiwan and mainland media until yesterday, Tuesday. While the updated version still contains the statement that the US calls for the, quote, peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences, end quote, it stresses this is, quote, consistent with the wishes and best interests of the people of Taiwan, end quote. Though this may seem like a small thing, a change to a website, it's actually a huge deal. And Beijing understands this, which is why we have seen a furious response from Chinese leadership. Yesterday, China's foreign ministry called the website changes political manipulation, which, quote, will not succeed in changing the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. State media and several fiery articles express that Washington is, quote, hollowing out its one China policy, end quote. We will continue to follow the story as it develops over the next few weeks. Okay, last up for today's episode, let's discuss the Chinese economy. And there are 2 developments that I wanted to discuss with you guys today. American business sentiment in China and the housing sector. Over the last week, we have already looked at survey data from EU and Japanese factories and businesses operating in China. We remember that business sentiment towards the lockdowns and the current policies in the mainland has been very poor. Now, the American Chamber of Commerce has published its own survey data of its members, that is, American businesses operating in China, and it's not much better than EU and Japanese business views. In the survey of 121 members between April 29th through May 5th, 49%, these are the American companies, said foreign workers are either significantly less likely or are even refusing to move to China because of COVID-related policies, with 82% identifying quarantine and lockdown times as the main reason. Indeed, the American Chamber chairman recently expressed, quote, we are bracing for a mass exodus of foreign talent this summer, with fewer employees overseas willing to take up open positions here in China, end quote. All 121 companies surveyed said that they had been affected by the government's COVID-19 policies. Some 58% of them have decreased revenue projections for their China operations this year. Almost 2/3 report reduced production capabilities due to lack of employees and inability to get supplies or government-ordered lockdowns. Now, moving to the housing sector. For several months now, we have been following the process of state-owned or state-supported property developers sucking up more land sold by local authorities for residential development, while crisis-hit private competitors heavily reduce land acquisitions. This trend seems to now be accelerating in some key regions. For example, in the critically important Pearl River Delta region, in the last round of public auctions, 10 state-backed developers took up 15 out of 17 residential land plots sold by the local Guangzhou government through public auctions, accounting for an incredible 95% of the total transaction value. The city's subway operator, Guangzhou Metro, alone purchased 4 of the plots for 16.5 billion yuan, or $2.5 billion. What is potentially concerning about this is that Guangzhou Metro needs to buy the land to build infrastructure because infrastructure is needed to support growth, but infrastructure investment is mostly coming from state-backed firms like Guangzhou Metro, which in turn relies on support from the local government, which is pushing state-backed firms to build more infrastructure. However, the local government, in order to pay for the infrastructure, is not just relying on tax revenue and issuing special bonds, but also selling land, which is now mostly being purchased by the state-backed firms that need to build the infrastructure. So we can see the issue here, right? Now, on these developments, Caixin analysts observed yesterday, quote, "The land auction in Guangzhou offers a snapshot of state-backed developers' expansion in the national land market as private businesses grow more cautious on spending amid the market slump. A total of 15 Chinese cities, including Beijing and Shenzhen, have launched the first round of land sales this year, with state companies taking bigger chunks in most cities. In Beijing, state developers accounted for 97% of the total land sales of 48 billion yuan, while Shenzhen sold all of its 8 plots to state players." End quote. The only exception of the 15 cities was Hangzhou, provincial capital of Zhejiang. Now, we will continue our coverage of China's crisis-hit housing sector, which is set to get worse this month, tomorrow. See you then.